I never expected that a power outage would be the thing to dismantle my life. Not dismantle in the sense of destruction, but in the way an archaeologist carefully takes apart a sealed tomb, letting light and air into a space that has been dark for 1,000 years. My life was that tomb, ordered, quiet, and meticulously arranged to protect the fragile thing inside. Me. And the man who held the chisel, who accidentally broke the seal, was Liam. My boss. My world, before him, was a grid of straight lines and carefully chosen color palettes. I was a graphic designer, and my apartment reflected it. White walls, gray furniture, a single succulent on the windowsill that I watered every Tuesday morning. My routine was my fortress. Coffee at 7, walk to the office by 8:15, headphones on by 8:30, lunch at my desk at 1. This predictable rhythm was a low, comforting hum that drowned out the silence of a life lived alone. It was a shield against the chaos I saw in other people's lives, the messy, unpredictable entanglements of feeling. I had convinced myself that I preferred the quiet order of observation to the risk of participation. Then Liam arrived. He was hired as the new creative director, a transfer from the Chicago office. He walked into our open-plan space on a Monday morning, and the entire building seemed to shift on its foundation, tilting slightly in his direction. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed built to carry more than just the weight of his messenger bag. His hair was dark and a little unruly, a stark contrast to the severe, minimalist lines of his clothes. He moved with a quiet confidence, a sense of gravity that pulled all the ambient noise of the office into his orbit and silenced it. He wasn't loud or imposing. In fact, he was the opposite. His voice was a low, calm rumble, the kind of sound you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. When he spoke in meetings, he didn't raise his voice. The room simply quieted to listen. He had this way of looking at you when you spoke, a focused, unwavering attention that made you feel like you were the only person in the universe. It was terrifying and mesmerizing. He became the centerpiece in the museum of my secret admiration. I cataloged him from the safe distance of my cubicle, collecting details like precious, forbidden artifacts. The way he'd rub the back of his neck when he was deep in thought. The scent of his cologne, a subtle mix of sandalwood and something clean, like fresh linen, that would linger in the elevator after he'd gotten off on his floor. The faint crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he gave one of his rare, genuine smiles. I knew the exact shade of blue of his favorite coffee mug. I knew he tapped his pen twice against the table before making a major design decision. These observations were my own private art collection, stored in a gallery no one else could enter. He was, of course, completely unattainable. The reasons were a litany I recited to myself whenever my thoughts strayed too far into fantasy. First, he was my boss, a professional chasm between us that was uncrossable. Second, he was, for all intents and purposes, straight. I'd heard him on the phone once, his voice soft, talking to someone about dinner reservations, and my mind had immediately sketched in a beautiful, elegant girlfriend, someone who matched his quiet grace. He wore no ring, but that meant nothing. Men like Liam, men who looked like they were carved from some warmer, stronger version of reality, were never single. They were never, ever interested in quiet, anxious men like me who organized their sock drawers by color and season. So I kept my distance. I did my work, did it well, and hoped for nothing more than his quiet nod of approval on a finished project. My yearning was a low-grade fever, a constant, dull ache behind my ribs. It was a familiar pain, the one that came with wanting something you knew you could never have. It was manageable. It was part of my routine. Until the storm came. It was a Thursday in late October. The sky had been a bruised, heavy gray all day, threatening a storm that finally broke in the late afternoon. Rain began to lash against the tall windows of our downtown office building, the wind howling a mournful song around the corners of the high-rise. We were on a tight deadline for a massive rebranding project, and the air in the office was thick with the scent of stale coffee and stress. People started leaving around 6, pulling on coats and making nervous jokes about the weather, until it was just me and Liam, hunched over our respective computers in the deepening twilight. The city lights below us blurred into a watercolor painting of orange and white through the rain-streaked glass. The only sounds were the furious click of my mouse, the soft scratch of his pen on paper, and the storm raging outside. I was hyper-aware of him, of his presence filling the vast, empty space. His quiet breathing was a counter-rhythm to the frantic beat of my own heart. I kept my eyes glued to my screen, a burning intensity in my focus that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with not looking at him. "Almost there," he said, and his voice, without the usual office chatter to soften it, was a deep vibration that seemed to travel directly up my spine. I just nodded, unable to form a word. My throat felt tight, constricted. And then it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, casting the room in a strobe of harsh white and sudden black. A collective groan went up from the servers in the IT department down the hall, and then, with a final, definitive hum, everything went dark. The emergency lights, a series of faint green rectangles, clicked on, casting eerie, skeletal shadows on the walls. The building's systems died. The air conditioning fell silent. The hum of the computers vanished. The only sound left was the rain, now a furious, deafening roar against the glass, and the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy in the sudden, oppressive darkness. "Well," Liam's voice came out of the black, startlingly close. "That's not ideal." The disruption was absolute. The grid of my life, the carefully constructed fortress of my routine, had just been completely and utterly blacked out. The emergency lighting cast just enough of a sickly green glow for me to see his silhouette rising from his desk. He walked toward the massive windows that overlooked the city, a dark shape against the storm-tossed skyline. My own phone's flashlight beam cut a nervous, trembling path across the floor as I fumbled for it. "Any luck with the main doors?" he asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the panic that was beginning to bubble in my chest. "No," I managed to say, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "Security system must have defaulted to a hard lockdown. We're not getting out until the power is back." He turned from the window, and the faint light caught the planes of his face, making him look like a statue in the gloom. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't even annoyed. He just seemed thoughtful. That steady calm, which I usually admired from a distance, was now the only anchor in a suddenly chaotic sea, and I found myself clinging to it. "Right?" he said, a simple affirmation. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I had catalogued 100 times, but now, in this strange intimacy, it felt new and profoundly human. "Okay, let's find the emergency kit. Should be some water, maybe a flashlight that doesn't belong to a phone." We moved through the darkened office, our phone beams dancing like nervous fireflies. The familiar space was transformed into a landscape of looming, monstrous shapes. Desks became hulking beasts, chairs their crouching minions. The forced proximity was immediate and jarring. In the light of day, we had acres of professional distance between us. Now, in the dark, the world had shrunk to the small, shared circle of our flashlight beams. I could smell the rain on his coat, the faint, clean scent of his soap. Every small sound was amplified, the scuff of his shoes on the carpet, the soft rustle of his jacket. We found the emergency kit in the supply closet. It was a large plastic tub containing 2 dusty bottles of water, a foil blanket that crinkled loudly, a first aid kit, and a heavy-duty flashlight. Liam clicked it on, and a powerful, steady beam of white light cut through the gloom, pushing back the shadows. It felt like a small victory. "Not much, but it's something," he said, his voice a low rumble in the confines of the closet. He handed me one of the water bottles, and our fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was a spark that shot up my arm, a jolt of pure electricity that made my breath catch in my throat. I pulled my hand back as if burned, my heart doing a frantic, stumbling dance. I was sure he must have felt it, must have seen my reaction even in the dim light. But he just turned away, his expression unreadable, and started walking toward the break room. I followed him, my mind a frantic buzz of overanalysis. It was an accident, a meaningless, incidental touch, but my skin still tingled where he'd made contact, a phantom warmth that spread through my entire body. My carefully constructed walls of professionalism and emotional distance were beginning to feel terrifyingly thin, like wet paper. The break room had a wall of windows, and the lightning outside periodically lit up the room in brilliant, stark flashes, illuminating the space for a split second before plunging us back into darkness. It was like seeing the world through a camera shutter. In one flash, I saw Liam standing by the counter, his shoulders slumped slightly. In the next, he was looking at me, his expression something I couldn't decipher in the brief, blinding light. Vending machine might still work on battery, he suggested, his voice quiet. We found it did, and our grand feast consisted of a shared bag of stale pretzels and the 2 bottles of water. We sat at one of the small cafe tables, the big flashlight placed between us like a campfire, casting our shadows long and distorted on the wall behind us. The awkwardness should have been unbearable. Me, the quiet designer, trapped with the new, imposing creative director. But the darkness worked a strange magic. It stripped away our titles, our roles, the entire context of our professional lives. We were just 2 people in a dark room, waiting out a storm. So, he started, his voice soft. Tell me something not work-related, Julian. The question caught me off guard. My life outside of work was a quiet, empty landscape. What was there to tell? I have a succulent. I stammered, and immediately felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I have a succulent? That was the best I could do. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. But Liam didn't laugh. He just tilted his head, a genuine curiosity in his eyes, which were catching the glow from the flashlight. A succulent? What kind? And so I told him. I told him about my perfectly ordered apartment, about the single, stoic plant I managed not to kill. And from there, somehow, the conversation flowed. I talked about growing up in a small town, about my love for old maps and minimalist art. I spoke more to him in that 1 hour than I had to anyone in the past year. Then it was his turn. He told me about Chicago, about sailing on Lake Michigan. And then he told me something that cracked the perfect, confident facade I had built up around him. He spoke about his last big project, a passion project he'd started on his own, an architectural design for a community arts center. He'd poured years into it, only to have the funding pulled at the last minute. I just failed, he said, his voice dropping so low it was almost a whisper. He wasn't looking at me, but at the pretzel dust on the table. I put everything into it, and it just fell apart. That's why I took the transfer here. To get away from it. To start over. This glimpse of vulnerability was a revelation. The untouchable man from my daydreams, the confident director, was just a person who had known failure and disappointment. The ache in my chest shifted from one of pure, distant yearning to something deeper, something warmer. It was empathy. It was connection. And it was infinitely more dangerous. A particularly loud clap of thunder rattled the windows, making me jump. The flashlight flickered. My anxiety, which had been lulled by our conversation, came rushing back. The room felt colder, the darkness more profound. I wrapped my arms around myself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Liam noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed to notice everything. It's getting cold, he stated simply. The couches in the main lounge are probably more comfortable than these chairs. We should try to get some sleep. He stood up, and for a moment, I thought he would just walk away, that our fragile truce with the darkness was over. But he held out a hand to me. It wasn't a demand, just an offer. A simple, kind gesture. After a beat of hesitation that felt like an eternity, I took it. His hand was large and warm, and it enveloped mine completely. The contact was no longer an accidental spark, but a steady, grounding current. He pulled me to my feet, and he didn't let go. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the strobing flashes of lightning outside. We moved to the lounge area, a space with 2 long, low couches facing each other. The air was colder here, the chill seeping through the glass from the storm-swept city. We sat on opposite couches at first, a chasm of empty space and unspoken tension between us. The powerful flashlight beam was dimmed now, pointing at the ceiling to create a soft, ambient glow. Our shadows danced in its periphery. We had long since run out of stale pretzels and conversation. The silence that fell between us was different now. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers. It was the heavy, charged silence of 2 people acutely aware of each other in the dark. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing, a steady, rhythmic cadence that seemed to be the only real thing in the world. I focused on it, tried to match my own ragged breaths to its calm tempo. I shivered, a small, involuntary tremor that ran through my whole body. The thin fabric of my work shirt was no match for the creeping cold. Here, Liam's voice was a soft rumble from across the room. I saw his silhouette move, the loud crinkle of the foil emergency blanket filling the quiet. He unfolded it, the metallic sheet catching the dim light. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. He didn't toss it over. He walked around the coffee table that separated us and sat down on my couch. Not too close, but close enough that the space between us felt electric, buzzing with 1,000 unspoken possibilities. My entire body went rigid. He draped the blanket over both of us, his arm brushing against mine as he settled it over my shoulders. The crinkling foil was a cacophony in the stillness. Underneath it, the warmth from his body radiated across the small gap between us. It was a tangible thing, a heat that my own cold skin craved with a desperate, aching need. I could feel the solid presence of his thigh just inches from my own. If I moved, if I so much as breathed too deeply, we would touch. I held myself perfectly still, a statue carved from anxiety and desire. "Better?" he asked, his voice low and close to my ear. I could only manage a nod, my throat too tight to speak. The scent of him, sandalwood, linen, and the clean, ozone smell of the rain, was overwhelming. It filled my lungs, my head, my senses. My carefully ordered world had been reduced to this single, terrifying, wonderful point in space and time. This couch, this blanket, this man beside me. He shifted slightly, and his shoulder pressed against mine. The contact was solid, warm, and real. It wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, gentle pressure that sent a shockwave through me. My mind went completely blank. All the reasons, all the barriers, all the careful logic I had constructed evaporated, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of the feeling. The warmth, the closeness, the wanting. Slowly, tentatively, as if testing the ice on a frozen lake, I leaned into the touch. I let my head rest against his shoulder. It felt like giving up a weight I had been carrying my entire life. His body was so solid, so steady, a port in the storm that was raging both outside the window and inside my own chest. He didn't pull away. Instead, I felt his arm move from behind his back, sliding around my shoulders, pulling me just a little closer. His hand rested on my arm, his thumb beginning to draw slow, soothing circles on the fabric of my sleeve. Each circle was a brand, a mark of possession that made my heart ache with a terrifying, hopeful joy. This couldn't be happening. This was a dream, a fever fantasy brought on by stress and darkness. But then I felt the rumble in his chest as he took a deep breath. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart through his shirt. It was real. We sat like that for a long time, listening to the rain and each other's breathing. The world outside ceased to exist. There was no office, no deadline, no hierarchy. There was only the darkness, the sound of the storm, and the incredible, impossible warmth of him pressed against me. Then, his thumb stopped its slow circling. His hand tightened slightly on my arm. He shifted, and I felt him turn his head toward me. I knew, without seeing, that he was looking at me. I tilted my head up, my cheek scraping against the soft fabric of his shirt. In the faint, green glow of the emergency lights, I could just make out the shape of his face, the dark pools of his eyes. The space between us was charged, humming with a question that hung unspoken in the air. My entire being was screaming, a silent, desperate plea. "Please, don't let this be a mistake." He lowered his head, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to break the spell. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, caught in the gravity of his approach. His lips brushed against mine, a touch as soft and uncertain as a whisper. It was a question. I answered by closing my eyes and pressing back, just slightly. That was all the confirmation he needed. The kiss deepened, still slow, still tentative, but now with a current of sureness running through it. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion, but of discovery. It tasted of stale pretzels and something that was just him, a flavor I knew I would spend the rest of my life trying to define. His hand moved from my arm to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me there as if he was afraid I might disappear. My own hands, which had been clenched into fists at my sides, finally uncurled, coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, reassuring beat of his heart beneath my palms. My world didn't just tilt. It shattered. The careful grid of lines and rules I had used to navigate my life exploded into a million pieces, and in its place was just this. This one, perfect, impossible moment. The point of no return. The first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, diluting the darkness and turning the world from black to a hazy, washed-out blue. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city that looked clean and new. The kiss had ended, but we hadn't moved. I had eventually drifted into a fitful, dreamless sleep, my head still resting on his shoulder, his arm a warm, heavy weight around me. Waking up was a slow, disorienting process. For a few blissful seconds, there was only the comfort of his warmth, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Then memory came crashing back in. The kiss, his hand in my hair, my hands on his chest, my entire body tensed. I became acutely aware of the awkward intimacy of our position, the crinkling foil blanket, the stale air of the office lounge, the reality of what had happened, and more importantly, where it had happened, settled in my stomach like a block of ice. I pulled away slowly, carefully, trying not to wake him. His arm fell away from my shoulders, and the loss of his warmth was immediate and sharp. A cold dread began to seep into its place. He stirred, murmuring something in his sleep, and shifted on the couch. I held my breath, but he settled again. I stood up and walked to the window, wrapping my arms around myself. The city was waking up below, the first few cars tracing paths of light on the wet streets. What had I done? What had we done? The darkness had felt like a separate reality, a pocket of time outside the normal rules. But the sun was rising, and with it, the cold, hard light of day. He was still my boss. I was still his employee. That kiss, which had felt so right and real in the dark, now seemed like a reckless, career-ending mistake. My anxiety, which had been soothed by his presence, came roaring back with a vengeance. My mind began its familiar, torturous spiral. He was probably tired, stressed, disoriented by the blackout. It was a fluke, a moment of shared vulnerability that he would surely regret as soon as he was fully awake. He was probably straight, and this was just some kind of bizarre, confusing aberration. I had misread everything. I had taken a moment of kindness and twisted it into something it wasn't. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, prickling sensation under my skin. I had ruined everything. Not just my job, but the simple, pleasant professional relationship we'd had. Now it would be a minefield of awkward glances and suffocating silence. I heard him stir again, and this time a low groan signaled he was waking up. I couldn't face him. I kept my back to him, staring out the window with an intensity that I hoped would make me invisible. Julian. His voice was rough with sleep. I didn't turn around. Morning, I said, my own voice tight and formal. It sounded foreign in my own ears. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. It was 1,000 times worse than the silence of the night before. I could feel his eyes on my back. I could practically hear him replaying the night's events, the regret clicking into place. The easy intimacy we had shared was gone, evaporated by the morning light, leaving this brittle, awkward shell in its place. He cleared his throat. I should see if the phones are working. Try to call building maintenance. Good idea, I said, still not turning. He stood up and walked away. I didn't watch him go, but I felt his absence as a palpable relief and a profound loss. The emotional whiplash was making me nauseous. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window, closing my eyes. I was such an idiot. A hopeful, romantic idiot. I had let one night in the dark dismantle years of carefully constructed self-preservation. He was gone for what felt like an eternity. I stayed by the window, a sentinel guarding a fortress of my own misery. When he came back, his footsteps were heavy on the carpet. Line's still dead, he said. His tone was flat, professional. All business. It was a confirmation of my worst fears. He was already building the wall back up between us, brick by painful brick. Last night never happened. And just as that thought solidified in my mind, the building's systems roared back to life. The lights flickered on, buzzing with a harsh, fluorescent glare that felt like an assault after the gentle darkness. The air conditioning kicked in with a whoosh. The quiet hum of the servers returned. The world was back to normal. The spell was broken. We were just two employees who had been stuck at the office overnight. I finally turned to look at him, schooling my features into a neutral mask. He was standing by his desk, gathering his things, not looking at me. His movements were clipped, efficient. The warm, vulnerable man from the night before was gone, replaced by the cool, confident creative director. My heart sank. It was over. It had never even begun. He slid his laptop into his bag and zipped it shut with a sound that felt painfully final. He looked up, and his eyes finally met mine across the room. His expression was unreadable, a carefully blank slate. "Julian," his voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the office. "We need to talk." Those 4 words landed like stones in my stomach. We need to talk. It was the universal prelude to rejection, the formal opening to a speech about mistakes and professionalism and pretending things never happened. I braced myself, summoning the last of my emotional fortitude. I would be calm. I would be professional. I would nod and agree that it was a mistake, and then I would go home and fall apart where no one could see me. "Okay," I said, my voice betraying a slight tremor that I hated. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, his gaze intense, searching. The silence stretched, pulling taut between us. The harsh office lighting exposed everything. The dark circles under my eyes, the wrinkled state of my clothes, the raw, undisguised fear on my face. There was nowhere left to hide. "Last night," he began, and then stopped. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his already messy hair. He looked nervous. It was the first crack in the professional facade he'd worn all morning. "I need to be sure you know that last night, it wasn't a mistake. Not for me." The words didn't compute at first. My brain, so prepared for the opposite message, couldn't process them. I just stared at him, my mouth slightly agape. He took my silence as confusion or disbelief and continued, his words coming out in a quiet, steady rush. "I've wanted to. I've been trying to find a way to talk to you for weeks. Outside of work. But I'm your boss, and the lines are so complicated. I didn't know how. I didn't even know if you were interested." He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, his eyes full of a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "To be honest, I told the team we needed to push for this deadline because I knew it would mean working late. I was hoping it would just be the 2 of us. I engineered this, Julian. Not the storm, obviously, but this. Us. Alone." The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Engineered. He had created this situation. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fluke. It was intentional. The entire narrative I had constructed in my head, the story of my foolishness and his regret, crumbled into dust. "And that person I was on the phone with a few weeks ago," he added, as if reading the litany of my insecurities from a list. "The one you probably overheard me making dinner plans with? That was my sister. She was in town for a conference." He was clearing my misconceptions, one by one. He was systematically dismantling the walls I had built around the idea of him, showing me that the fortress I had been hiding in was of my own making. My throat was tight with a mix of shock and a soaring, terrifying hope. "I thought you were straight," I whispered, the words barely audible. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I know. Most people do. My life has been quiet. For a long time. After my last relationship ended, I just focused on work, on building things. It was easier, safer. And then I came here, and I saw you. So focused, so talented, and so self-contained. It was like watching someone live behind glass. I just wanted to find a way to knock. The dam inside me broke. All the fear, the yearning, the carefully suppressed hope of the past few months came flooding out in a wave of profound, overwhelming relief. The feeling was so intense it brought tears to my eyes. "I have a whole gallery of you in my head," I confessed, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Little things. The way you hold your coffee mug. The sound of your voice. I never thought." My voice broke. In 3 long strides, he crossed the space between us. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He gently cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking away the tears I hadn't even realized were falling. His touch was no longer tentative or questioning. It was sure. It was grounding. "I was so scared this morning," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I woke up and you were gone, and I thought I had destroyed everything, that I'd pushed too far, that I'd terrified you." "No," I choked out. "I was the one who was terrified. I thought I had ruined everything." A real smile, the genuine one that reached his eyes, finally broke through his worried expression. Looks like we're both idiots. I let out a shaky laugh that was half a sob. Yeah, it seems so, Julian, he said, his voice dropping to that low, serious rumble that made my heart ache. Can I kiss you again? Here, in the light. I didn't need words. I just leaned in and met him halfway. The second kiss was nothing like the first. The first had been a question mark in the dark. This one was a statement. It was an answer. It was sure and deep and full of all the words we hadn't been able to say. It was relief and recognition and the breathtaking feeling of coming home to a place you never knew you were searching for. It was a promise, made under the harsh fluorescent lights of a Tuesday morning, that the darkness was finally over. The following Monday felt like walking into a different world, even though it was the same office, the same desk, the same buzzing fluorescent lights. Everything was overlaid with a new, secret saturation. The gray carpet seemed less dull, the air less sterile. My coffee tasted richer. The world hadn't changed, but I had. A switch had been flipped inside me, illuminating corners of my life that had been dark for as long as I could remember. Liam and I had agreed to keep things quiet at work, at least for a while. The professional line between us was still there, a reality we had to navigate, but now it felt like a game, a secret we shared. Our interactions were a carefully choreographed dance of propriety, but beneath the surface, a new current flowed between us. A simple, "Good morning, Julian," from him as he passed my desk was no longer just a greeting, it was a caress. The way his eyes would meet mine for a fraction of a second too long in a meeting was a silent conversation. That afternoon, an email popped up in my inbox. The subject line was the project code we'd been working on, but the body of the message contained only 3 words. Thinking of you. I stared at the words on the screen, a slow, warm smile spreading across my face. It was such a small thing, a simple, digital whisper, but it felt monumental. It was a thread of connection, invisible to everyone else, stretching across the open-plan office, tying me to him. I quickly typed a reply. Me too. We spent the weekend together. Not at my sterile, minimalist apartment or his, which I had yet to see, but out in the world. We went to an art museum, the irony of which was not lost on me. For years, I had treated him like a piece of art to be admired from a distance, and now here he was, standing next to me, his shoulder brushing against mine as we looked at a Rothko painting. He pointed out the architectural lines of the gallery building, his voice low and full of passion. I told him about the principles of color theory in the painting, and he listened with that same focused intensity that had once terrified me and now made me feel like the most interesting person on the planet. Later, as we walked through the park, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet, he took my hand. It was a simple, public gesture, and my heart hammered in my chest. But no one pointed or stared. The world didn't stop. It was just normal. His hand was warm and solid in mine, a constant, reassuring pressure. It felt right. On Sunday evening, we were sitting on a bench overlooking the city skyline as the sun went down, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange. We had been talking for hours, filling in the empty spaces of each other's lives, sharing stories and histories and small, silly fears. He turned to me, a playful glint in his eye. You know, for an emergency, you're not supposed to sleep on the middle of the couch. You're supposed to leave room for others. I laughed, the sound genuine and free. It was our first inside joke, a callback to that night in the dark, a way of taking the memory of fear and awkwardness and polishing it into something warm and shared. Well, I was cold, I retorted, bumping his shoulder with mine. And I have it on good authority that the other person on the couch was hoarding all the heat. Guilty, he said, his smile softening. He squeezed my hand. I'm glad you were there, Julian. Me too, I said, and I meant it more than anything I had ever said. Sitting there, with the city lights beginning to twinkle on below us and the solid warmth of his hand in mine, I thought about my old life. The grid of straight lines, the fortress of routine, the quiet, orderly silence. I had built it all to protect myself from the chaos of feeling, from the risk of being hurt. But the storm had come anyway. It had shattered my walls and plunged me into darkness, and in that darkness, I hadn't found chaos. I had found connection. I had found him. I had learned that the most beautiful things in life aren't found in the carefully curated galleries we build for ourselves, but in the messy, unpredictable, and breathtaking risk of letting someone else in.